Housekeeping still remains the most important business of the world. It engages the hearts and minds of more people and calls for higher qualities than any other occupation. Each woman faces it single-handed. She must know how to cook, know food. She must know how.
Imagine it's 1912. You're a young woman living in London or New York. You wear long skirts, your hair is pinned up neatly, and your world is rapidly changing. Cars are appearing on the streets, women are entering universities, and suffragettes are marching with banners demanding votes for women. But here's the twist. Not every woman is cheering them on. In fact, thousands of women actively opposed the early feminist and suffragette movements. They organized rallies, published essays, and even created anti-suffrage leagues. Why would women reject a movement that was supposedly fighting for their freedom? Today, we're diving into this fascinating and often overlooked chapter of history. Why some women in the early 1900s rejected feminism. We'll explore the social norms, cultural fears, and personal beliefs that shaped their resistance, and why understanding their perspective actually gives us a deeper view of how feminism evolved. Let's start by rewinding to the world these women lived in. The world before feminism. At the dawn of the 20th century, the average woman's life was tightly bound by tradition. Most women were expected to marry, raise children, and manage the household. Their social value came from being a good wife and mother, loyal, moral, and nurturing. This wasn't just personal preference, it was an entire social system. Laws, religion, and education reinforced these roles. Women couldn't vote in most countries, had limited access to higher education, and were often barred from many professions. Now, it's easy to assume that all women felt trapped by this, but that's not quite true. For many, this system offered security and identity. Being a homemaker wasn't seen as oppression, it was seen as purpose. When early feminists, especially suffragettes, began calling for political equality, some women saw that as a threat to the structure that gave their lives meaning. They weren't necessarily against women's progress, but they feared that feminism would undo the moral and social fabric of society. One prominent anti-suffragist, Mrs. Humphrey Ward of Britain, argued that the feminist push for independence was, annoyed, a rebellion against nature. She believed that men and women had different, complementary roles, and that upsetting that balance would harm families and communities. So part of the rejection came from a deep belief that feminism was unnatural, a denial of what many thought were God-given differences. Fear of social and moral upheaval. To understand their resistance, we have to step into their mindset. In the early 1900s, society was structured like a ladder, with men on top as providers and women as moral guardians. The family was the core of everything: religion, community, and nation. Early feminists were challenging all of that. They questioned marriage laws, demanded reproductive rights, and criticized how religion kept women in their place. For conservative women, this wasn't liberation, it was chaos. There was a fear that if women became too independent, if they abandoned their homes for politics or careers, the family would collapse, and with it, society itself. In the United States, the Anti-Suffrage Association used slogans like, "You do not need a ballot to clean out your sink." That may sound condescending today, but back then, it reflected a worldview where women's strength was domestic and moral, not political. They saw their influence as something private but powerful, shaping husbands, children, and communities through virtue and example, not through public activism. In fact, many anti-feminist women saw the vote as a burden, not a right. They argued that men's political world was corrupt, full of lies and power struggles, and women, being morally superior, should stay above that. This moral superiority argument was actually used by both sides. Feminists said, "We need the vote to clean up politics," while anti-feminists said, "We're too pure to get our hands dirty with it." It was a debate not just about rights, but about identity. The appeal of tradition and femininity. Another reason many women rejected feminism was the appeal of traditional femininity. Remember, early feminism didn't always look glamorous. Suffragettes were mocked as mannish, unladylike, or angry spinsters. Newspapers caricatured them with short hair, scowling faces, and broken umbrellas, as if they were women who'd lost their charm and grace. For women raised to value beauty, manners, and domestic skill, this image was deeply uncomfortable. Many asked, why should I give up being a lady? Being feminine, graceful, nurturing, devoted, was their social capital. Feminism, in their eyes, threatened to strip away that power and replace it with something uncertain. In a way, traditional femininity was its own kind of currency. It gave women respect, social belonging, and sometimes even influence over men. Think of the separate spheres ideology. Men handled politics and business. Women ruled the home and moral life. If feminism erased those spheres, where would women's influence go? This anxiety was especially strong among middle and upper-class women, who often didn't work outside the home. Their social status was tied to their roles as wives and mothers. Supporting feminism for them might mean losing privilege rather than gaining it. So while feminists wanted equality, many women felt they already had a kind of power, just in a different form. Religion and the divine order. Religion played a massive role in shaping anti-feminist sentiment. In Christian-majority societies like Britain and the US, religious teachings reinforced gender hierarchy. The Bible was often quoted to justify male authority. Verses about wives submitting to husbands, or Eve's sin leading to female subordination. To many devout women, feminism seemed to directly defy God's will. Groups like the Women's National Anti-Suffrage League in Britain and church-affiliated women's clubs in America often used moral and religious arguments. They warned that feminism would lead to spiritual decay, family breakdown, and even moral anarchy. They weren't simply parroting male opinions. These women were deeply sincere in their beliefs. For them, defending traditional roles was an act of faith, and religion gave them something feminism couldn't: a clear, comforting sense of purpose and order in a changing world. It's also worth noting that early 20th century feminism was associated with radicalism, socialist movements, free love advocates, and secular thinkers. So for religious women, rejecting feminism was also a way of protecting their communities from what they saw as dangerous modern ideas. Class and racial dynamics. Class also shaped women's relationship with feminism. Working-class women often felt that the feminist movement was a luxury of the elite. Many suffragists came from privileged backgrounds, educated, middle or upper-class women who had the leisure to organize rallies and write pamphlets. But a factory worker or domestic servant didn't have that freedom. She was too busy surviving. Voting rights didn't always feel urgent when you were struggling to feed your children. So some women rejected feminism not out of ideology, but out of practical exhaustion. In the US, race also complicated things. Black women were frequently excluded from white-led feminist organizations. Some white anti-feminist women, annoyed disturbingly, used racist arguments to justify their stance, claiming that giving women the vote would empower undesirable groups or upset the racial hierarchy. This shows that the anti-feminist movement wasn't just about gender. It was entangled with race, class, and social order. In many cases, women opposed feminism because they were defending a system that benefited them, even if it oppressed others. Not all women who rejected feminism were passive or submissive. Some actually created alternative movements that promoted women's welfare without embracing feminist ideals. For example, in Britain, women involved in charitable organizations and religious societies championed education, healthcare, and temperance, but under the banner of moral reform, not feminism. In the US, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, fought against alcohol abuse, arguing that it destroyed homes and women's safety. They empowered women to speak publicly and organize, but still claimed to uphold traditional values. These women were activists, just not in the feminist sense. They wanted to improve women's lives within the existing structure, not overturn it. So it's important to see that anti-feminist didn't always mean anti-progress. Some simply believed in a different version of womanhood, one centered on service, morality, and influence, rather than equality and rights. Finally, we can't ignore the simplest human reason of all: fear of change. The early 1900s were a whirlwind of industrialization, urban growth, and shifting gender roles. New technologies, new politics, and new social movements made the world feel unstable. For many women, feminism wasn't just about the vote. It symbolized a total upheaval of identity. What did it mean to be a woman if the old rules no longer applied? Change always comes with uncertainty, and not everyone welcomes it. Rejecting feminism was, in a sense, a way of holding on to stability in a rapidly changing world. So, why did some women reject feminism in the early 1900s? Because feminism challenged not only laws and politics, it challenged the meaning of womanhood itself. Some women feared losing the moral authority they held in the home. Others clung to religious and social traditions that gave their lives order. And some simply didn't see feminism as relevant to their struggles or values. Their rejection wasn't always ignorance or submission. Often it was a reflection of the world they knew and the identities they had built within it. But here's the paradox. Even as they opposed feminism, their actions, their organizing, debating, and public engagement helped expand women's participation in public life. In a strange way, their resistance also pushed history forward. Understanding these women doesn't mean agreeing with them. It means recognizing that progress has never been a straight line. Every movement meets resistance, sometimes even from those it's trying to liberate. And that resistance, as frustrating as it may be, forces society to define its values more clearly. So the next time you hear about early feminists marching for change, remember, behind them were other women marching in the opposite direction, each convinced she was fighting for what was right.